Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Jusmeet, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Sociology, and I'll be moderating the session today. So, CAST as practice is a research network that actually arose from a reading group that we started with Manali, Priyanka, and Vishal. We were meeting for several months. And the central question that we have been addressing in this reading group is about the persistence and the tenacity of caste. Why caste persists in every domain of India and beyond. What explains its tenacity, and why, despite so many other transformations, caste continues to morph and remain entrenched. So we are seeking to develop in these conversations a critical sociology of caste that avoids essentialism, doesn't see caste as a sort of a pre-given category, but as a contingent and historically evolved formation, and that has deep relevance to every aspect of the Indian society, actually also of South Asian society and even in the diaspora. So while we are seeking to understand the ongoing contemporary evolution of caste, we are also revisiting older debates about caste. The CRASSH Research Network takes up this question through a series of sessions. So today we are going to be talking about the question of affect and emotions and how this question is linked to caste as well as race. So we have three very distinguished speakers today, and none of them needs an introduction. But just to prepare for the cross-cultural dialogue that will follow, I'll say a few words about them. So Professor Gopal Guru, who's joining us online, is a retired professor of political science from the Center of Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and a former editor of possibly the most renowned journal, the Economic and Political Weekly in India. His major works include the edited volume Humiliation, Claims and Context, and co-authored books with Sundar Sarukkai, The Cracked Mirror, an Indian Debate on Experience and Theory, and more recently, Experience, Caste, and The Everyday Social. Hugo, who has taken a long train from Edinburgh yesterday to reach Cambridge, is a professor of sociology at the University of Edinburgh. He's the author of several influential books, including Untouchable Citizens, Dalit Movements and Democratization in Tamil Nadu, and Panthers in Parliament, Dalits, Caste, and Political Power in South India. More recently, he co-edited with Dhaneshwar Bhoi, Caste in Everyday Life, Experiences and Effects in Indian Society. We also have Eduardo Bonilla-Silva, who's James B. Duke Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Duke University. He'll be spending this academic year at the Department of Sociology at Cambridge as the Pitt Professor. Among his acclaimed publications are Racism Without Racists, Colorblind Racism, and White Supremacy and Racism in the Post-Civil Rights Era. All right, so the rules of the game: each speaker will talk for about 15 to 20 minutes each. Then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open to the audience. We also have many attendees online, although they'll not be able to speak as part of the seminar, as part of the webinar. You'll be asking questions. Please feel free to ask questions by typing into the Q&A box. So before we begin, I want to thank CRASSH for the opportunity to host this event, and Stuart is representing CRASSH today here, and especially Esther, Nikki, and Sam for the huge help with all the logistics, and my fellow conveners, Manali, Priyanka, Ankur, and Vishal. So let us start with Professor Gopal Guru.
Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation to join the conversation on the affective life of caste. I must really express my satisfaction that you have taken up this aspect of caste, which is not talked about much in our country. We only feel about it, but we don't discuss it in terms of its theoretical, its empirical details. So I'm going to make three arguments basically, and I got 15 minutes. I'll finish within 15 minutes. The first argument is that, the affective life of caste is not simply empirical expression. It also carries with it some kind of experience which requires some kind of theoretical explanation. So, affect is not simply a psychological expression that is done by a person who is carrying the burden of uh, affective life of caste, and I'm calling it as burden, and I'll explain why it is a burden. The second, I may not have time to discuss, but the complex relationship between emotions and reason. And I would have really made it more provocative to say that, learning the use of reason as if the untouchables don't know how to use the reason. But that question I will leave apart, and I'll focus mainly on the theoretical underpinnings of this affective life of caste. In this, I don't need to tell this gathering how caste is articulated in different forms and different processes of exploitation, discrimination, and even contamination. So I'll leave that as well uh, for for further discussion. Now, I am saying I'm arguing that caste, the affective life of caste has created an unfair moral burden on the lower caste people. And this unfair burden is actually expressed through emotions, emotions of uh, assertions, emotions of provocations, emotions of uh, even tear, and emotions of celebration. Now you can ask this question whether to what extent the untouchables or the lower caste in our country are able to uh, express their emotions in terms of these four modalities. So you can start giving examples right from Dr. Ambedkar, who was actually crying in Baroda when he didn't get a decent accommodation, and he was actually almost thrown out from the accommodation. So he was crying in a particular in a open space in Baroda. You know that is already depicted in the movie on Dr. Ambedkar, done by Dr. Jabbar Patel. No, there are series of incidences where you find Dalits actually uh, uh, approach Ambedkar through tears, to assertions, provocations, even determinations, and so that is there. One can easily witness in a day-to-day life of the lower caste people, particularly the untouchables. Now, there are several examples that can be cited to prove this point. But why it is unfair? That's the question. It is unfair because they require to be appreciated. Their celebration need to be appreciated, and through that the question their existence as the emotional being is established, but that spontaneous emotions are denied to them, and therefore it is unfair. And whereas others enjoy without limits celebrations, provocations, everything, but the untouchables are not allowed to do that. So that's why it is unfair. There's no fair distribution of celebration. So fair distribution of the acknowledgement of celebration. So that's one point that can underline the or emphasize the question of moral justice. So it's morally unfair to really uh, uh, suppress somebody's celebration, somebody's emotions. Now, from the other, from the part of the touchable community, you have three kinds of responses that lead to this affective life of caste. And I would like to suggest that the touchables also have uh, they also express as and when they get opportunity, they also express their emotions about the caste questions, the tragedy that is emanating from the caste experience. Now, the first kind of response that is offered is by those people to whom I call inverted imposters. And what do I mean by inverted imposter is the people who actually cry more than the victims. And so you can find them in clips, images on social media, and as if their tears and their body language, their emotions are absolutely very genuine. But I think the politics of uh, the affective politics of the imposter may not be may not explain the authenticity of the emotions. It is only the fake, and then rather than it is real, and they in a way try to ritualize uh, or normalize the very feelings, very emotions of the victim. So that's the inverted imposter who actually is trying to trivialize the very notion of uh, tear or emotions or affective life of caste. And one can give examples on I don't to prove this point, but I'm just making this point. So the second category is about those people who think who after who are actually pissed off with the Dalit narratives, whether it is autobiography, whether it is cinema, whether it is poetry, whatever they are pissed off, they are so upset with these expressions, and no one would really expect the decent expression of the touchables about the acknowledgement of the cultural expression of or right to expression of the untouchables. They can why they are actually upset because they think that the narratives, the expressions, the celebrations are so predictable. You don't expect anything different. So predictability becomes the source of the touchables being upset with the untouchables. They can very well say they can use normal expression like the untouchables are predictable. They are arguably predictable. They are by definition predictable. You can simply use these words without me adding any meaning to that. But the expression that we come across over here is that, oh, these expressions of the untouchable are sickeningly predictable. They are sickeningly predictable. So the word sickening adds a affective force to the sentence. So that is one way of that is one very subtle way of understanding the burden, the affective burden of caste. Now this is the second category. Now the third category, of course, is uh, less problematic, morally less problematic, and the touchables also express their emotions, their feelings about the tragedies, about the conditions of the untouchables. And I can just give one or two examples. One example is about one touchable literary figure whose name is Professor Bhalchandra Phadke, who is no more now. But he said after he read a very famous autobiography by Sharan Kumar Limbale, Akarmashi, after having read the autobiography, he said, I've got the pain as if I was bitten by 1,000 scorpion. So that is the feeling that is the expression that he made after he read this autobiography. Now, this particular expression is less problematic because it is unconditional sentiment that is expressed. It doesn't really require any reason as to why he's actually expressing. Uh, neither one can investigate into this expression. It is beyond any investigation. You just can attach any politics to this, as we can do it in the first case, as I mentioned. Uh, we can neither prove it false or true. It is self-evidently true. So I think this is the most desirable expression that one can expect from the touchables. And you can have histories of such kind of very innocent-looking expression about the tragedies, about the conditions of the untouchable. One can quote Gandhi as being very, very honest in expressing, but we can debate that if you want to. So this is the third category, which is so important, but it is not. Uh, it's it's very rare. It's very rare. Now, and the other area where we can really we can come across the sense of unfairness in terms of the affective life of caste. The affective life of caste becomes a burden for particularly those Launi artist. And the Launi artist, I guess everyone knows what is Launi. Launi is a folk dance, the form of folk dance in Maharashtra, a very famous folk dance of Maharashtra. And this Launi performance is done particularly by the lower caste, particularly the untouchable caste. Now, the Launi women who happen to be the Dalit by social origin also enjoy the presence of large audience, but it is not the aesthetic or a delicately choreographed dance that becomes the part of their affective appreciation, but it is the erotic that trumps the aesthetic. The erotic and caste comes together in the Launi performance. The caste underlines the performative rather than the aesthetic. Launi women enjoy the audience more for erotic desire rather than aesthetic appreciation. Caste background provides the cultural space on which the erotic desires of the male finds its satisfaction through Launi performance. The erotic plays out through the male bodily gestures that are morally offensive for the Launi artist. And this objection is actually voiced by one of the very important Launi performers, artists, Vithabai Narayan Gaukar from Maharashtra. See, her song is actually the testimony for critically accounting for the morally offensive behavior that the male, and particularly they are from the touchable caste, uh, who are actually witnessing the Launi performance. So the moral auditing actually involves the critique of the erotic desire of such a sensually wild bunch of male spectators. The song which she has sung in one of the performances is ethically bold and morally lacerating for the upper caste audience. Through her moving song, she is actually underlying the affective appeal for the touchables and try to bring out from within the upper caste spectators a sense of shame that betrays the aesthetic of the Launi. The spectators enjoy this as long as it is not their kind of women. Thus, the affective appeal needs to be understood in terms of its association with the broader cultural conditions that are dominated by the male desire. Now, what is unfair in this is that you do not really you do not enjoy the Lavani performance with aesthetic without any meaning, but you actually do it with a strong desire of erotic, which is not the same emotions are not actually expressed when you are actually witnessing other forms of dancing, classical dancing, for example. So there is some kind of a natural normalized behavior of the spectators who are basically from the upper caste. So this is another area where you find unfair burden of the affective life. Now, I would like to. Is there time for me?
Yes, you can take 5 more minutes, perhaps.
Oh, okay, that's it. Fine. Thank you very much. So I think this other problem is about the relationship between between reason and emotions. Uh, uh, and this is a long debate in philosophical deliberations, and I think we can go back to Descartes and others. But at the moment, I would, and we can discuss it if you want in the question answer session. But uh, what is the role of emotions in terms of communicating to people uh, the agonies and the questions and the problems of the touchables. Do you really require emotions or do you require reason? That is the central question that is asked. Uh, the moment you ask this question to the general audience, you find that they do not really lend any sympathetic ear to listen to this question. There's a lack of receptivity on the part of the touchables, and that's why, in a very Buddhist way, there's a dependent origination. I mean, the touchables really create conditions for the untouchables, where the untouchables become emotional and they become provocative because you're not lending your sympathetic ear to listen to their narratives. So the original dependent origination is that the conditions are already created by the touchables, withdrawal of these ethics of ears, and so that becomes a problem. And so the touchables, the untouchables are forced to actually provoke. Now, and then you have several examples to make your point. The question is when uh, when 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 the when untouchables actually, so to say, uh, speak or they express. Uh, the general observation is that empirical observation that there's a loss of feeling. There's no feeling about the untouchables. So there's a loss of feeling. The question, therefore, is the question that the untouchable asks is, why don't you have feeling about us? We are also human being. The very question why involves uh, some kind of element of reason. So there is a felt reason within the expression. So emotions and reasons are not separate; they are actually internal to each other. Even when the expressions of the untouchables are considered to be a cynical expression, even cynicism itself has reason. And as I mentioned, you become cynical because others don't really listen to you, and your expectations as a civilized person is that people should really have that moral horizons to to hear, to appreciate, to understand, to tolerate others expressions, howsoever difficult, howsoever uh, uncomfortable they are, but you need to listen to those. So the failure of the failure to create moral horizons in a civil society uh, is the cause for the untouchables, particularly untouchable women, to be provocative. And but you can be provocative, but can you be thoughtful? You can be provocative. You are provocating, but you are also thought provoking. So I think the thought is communicated, processed through this provocation. It's like the people waiter in the hotel is expecting attention from the clientele. The clientele doesn't pay any attention unless the waiter drops a plate on the floor and creates a student noise. So you require to create noise to make people attentive to your own problem. So I think it's not a very happy situation. It's not a desirable condition. People have to really, isn't it their obligation, their duty to listen to others, without waiting for the waiter to drop the plate on the floor and create a strident noise. So to what extent have you really progressed? What are your moral resources? Are they depleting? Are the expectations of Ambedkar and others belied? What is it? So that is the big question that continues to prop up. And since this question has an ontological link with the caste practices, they do very well in the contemporary times as well. So I must stop it. I must stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Gopal Guru. Can I invite Hugo, Professor Hugo Gorringe, to please come and share your thoughts?
Great, thanks very much. Apologies, I don't have a presenter. I wasn't quite sure what the format was today. And people are joining in already. This is great. So it's an honor to be invited. So many thanks for the invitation, especially to present in such illustrious company with those on screen and in the room. I'm here, I think, because of a book I published last year, co-edited, called Caste in Everyday Life, Experience and Effect in Indian Society, with postdoctoral scholar Dr. Dhaneswar Boy. So I want to acknowledge and thank him because he was the driving force behind that volume. A lot of the work that went into it is his. And that book is also a good place to start this talk, because though it received fairly positive reviews, and I mean, some of you who have read it have liked it, one criticism that was raised in a number of places was that we didn't sufficiently engage with the, quotes, political economy of caste. We were insufficiently attuned to the structural inequalities that underpin the caste system. Now, inequalities in access to and distribution of resources are critical to caste, and we wouldn't want to dispute that or argue with that in any way. You cannot understand the caste system without engaging with those structural aspects. Speaking at a tribunal on land rights organized by a local NGO, IAS, Indian Administrative Service officer and novelist turned politician Sihra stressed that, and I quote, "Caste is land and land is caste." Her point was that caste structures are rooted in material inequality. Why, given this, should we dedicate our focus to structures of feeling and affect? Why look at emotions rather than land reform or redistribution? What I want to suggest in this brief intervention is that such a focus is both justified and necessary because this is what animates and sustains caste. In terms of discussing the persistence and tenacity of caste, I think this is the nub of the matter. I wanted to begin with the quote from Sihra because land and land rights are a useful lens through which to tease out some of the key issues and debates. That Dalits are disproportionately numbered amongst the landless is well known and unquestionable. Where Dalits own land, furthermore, they are not at the mercy of landlords, they have a degree of independence and are able to express themselves more autonomously. As the NGO which organized the tribunal, Evidence, based in the southern city of Madurai, put it, no one can deny that social justice can only be fully realized for Dalits once they obtain land, assets, education, and power. The Dalits' confidence, they put it in a report, and courage depends on the eradication of the grave injustices they have suffered. Land is a resource with the potential to rebuild confidence and courage. Land is not only a mere economic resource, it's also an instrument for the affirmation of personal dignity. The demand for land, in other words, voiced by so many Dalit movements, cannot be reduced to economics or structural inequalities alone. The interplay between resources, values, and self-image is captured further by Father Yesumarian Tamil Dalit activist assertion that for us Dalits, land is a crucial issue, it's a self-dignity issue. The point about self-esteem and dignity is reinforced by the fact that many intermediate castes, those just above Dalits in the caste hierarchy, are a little different from Dalits in terms of land ownership, in terms of education, in terms of professionalization, but they're socially and politically strong and view themselves as superior. They build on that confidence to get ahead in a way that is denied to Dalits, as Gopal so articulately put it earlier. Many of the cases of land grabbing that were addressed by the Land Tribunal Sihra spoke at related to Dalits being cheated out of what land they had or excluded from it by dominant castes who could not, quote, stomach their rise. Respect and equality, this reminds us, do not automatically flow with material opportunities and resources. And understanding the relational dynamics of caste requires us to look beyond, quotes, objective and structural inequalities. This point was made with customary clarity many years ago by Ambedkar, who described caste as a graded hierarchy based on an ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt, pinpointing the affective logics underpinning caste. Grasping the affective hierarchies and registers through which people operate are vital for understanding the day-to-day, the everyday ways in which caste plays out, manifests, and is performed. Take, for example, the young Dalit activist who I interviewed far too long ago now. He was a pastor, he was himself a Dalit, he was training to work with the poor, he was an adherent of a supposedly egalitarian religion, and he confessed to me when we were doing an interview that I myself struggle to work with those who are below me in the caste hierarchy. Disgust, as Joel Lee observes, motivates observable behaviors as well as emotive ones, recoiling, physical withdrawal, panicky commotion that communicate a sense of hierarchical difference and often contradict avowed, explicit avowals of equality. Lee goes on to say, social structure differentially shapes the cultivation of emotion, speaking to the points that Professor Guru was making later on, encouraging particular classes, or in this case castes, to develop particular emotional repertoires and the way these repertoires assist in the reproduction of hierarchy. Now, these points are graphically illustrated in the experimental work of Hoff and Pandy. So in a series of experiments, they show how caste shapes people's views and expectations. Those who are socialized into lower caste status expect to be demeaned, to be viewed as lesser, to be treated in an inferior way. And this, unsurprisingly, has an effect on self-esteem and confidence. In simple problem-solving exercises, therefore, Dalits perform less well than other castes if, and only if, their caste identity is made salient prior to the experiment. When the experiment occurs in blind fashion, then the performance of Dalits is equal to, if not better than that of other castes. The effective logics of caste matter and have effects. They shape the performance of people in these circumstances because of the weight of expectation. When scheduled caste students go to university, think about how they're called out to receive government benefits in a real-life recreation of these experiments. As Jacqueline, leader of the Arundamala Peravai, a sub-caste of Dalits in Tamil Nadu, put it, others in college introduce themselves and they say, my dad's a doctor. But when we introduce ourselves, we have to say, my father's a drummer, or my father sweeps the streets or cleans the toilet. It's humiliating. In short, he said, our identity is inscribed with the tag of humiliation. Gopal Guru has done more than anyone to illustrate how central the experience and infliction of humiliation is for those at the receiving end of caste. And we can argue, and I think it's indisputable, that humiliation is one of the defining characteristics of untouchability. A person's status as Dalit is made salient through interactions of these natures. And again, in the book, humiliation Professor Guru refers to the ubiquitous use of the humiliating prefix Dalit, as when you talk about the Dalit president or the Dalit professor, in a way calculated to demean and to belittle the achievements of the person in question. Everybody else is just the president or the professor. This person is the Dalit president. Think also about how many manifestations of untouchability are designed precisely to humiliate, belittle, and exclude, rather than uphold purity or uphold any sort of structural logic. So in my own work in Tamil Nadu, there were examples of Dalits who were told that they could not let their male dogs breed with the dogs of upper castes, lest their pets become polluted. There is no logic here beyond that calculated to put people in their place. Think about rules which prevent Dalits who are expected to drum at funerals, which prevent them from drumming at their own. And again, the logic here is that your task is to venerate and not to play for yourself. More routinely, the use of demeaning language and nicknames. So you'll never be called by your name, you'll be called by a demeaning nickname designed to put you in your place. But also think about the violence inflicted on those who challenge the symbolic order of caste by, for example, twirling their moustaches, as famously happened in my field site, or riding horses to weddings. Caste identity and status, this shows, is neither given nor static, but created and reinforced through everyday interactions and performances. Conversely, dominant castes experience an affective edge in processes similar to what Du Bois and which Professor Bonilla-Silva has talked about, termed the wages of whiteness, and which we might think about as the wages of upper casteness. This is the privilege of being unmarked by caste, the privilege of being the president, not the Dalit president, for example, of claiming merit rather than reservation, and of cultures of learning and prescriptive networks which allow you to get ahead. All of these matter materially in terms of increased access to jobs, resources, and social standing. When I was doing my field work back in the 90s, yes, I am that old, I remember I was chatting to a friend and somebody came along. Did you get that job? I was like, no, I didn't have the main qualification. No, what was that? Your CV is really good. Oh, I'm not an upper caste, I'm not a nada. So the notion that for certain jobs, actually, it doesn't matter how well you do, who you are matters more than what you do. Both stigma and social standing impact on life chances. Inequalities in recognition and distribution mutually reinforce one another, as Michel Lamont notes. Lamont and colleagues have worked on the consequences of affective hierarchies and note that, and I quote, stigma not only leads to discrimination and exclusion for low-status outgroup members, it also affects the distribution of important resources, as the esteemed in-group hoards or extracts social, cultural, economic, and spatial capital at the expense of the lower status group. Their work points to processes such as evaluation, standardization, and stigmatization as ongoing, routine, and fundamental features of social relationships, which serve to police who gets access to certain posts and who doesn't. While such processes may be perceived as having little to do with inequality, in fact, are often seen as fundamental to, quotes, meritocracy, they help to create the conditions within which inequality takes shape. They serve as gatekeepers to entry into institutions. Subtle questioning, for example, may deny people rooms to let. And again, I interviewed many Dalit activists who went into certain neighborhoods and there was no question of them having the money, no question of them having the social standing to fit in, but once the subtle questioning revealed that they were of the wrong caste, they were denied a room on spurious grounds. Think also of the questioning in job interviews, which tries to get at the cultural standing of people. And again, work by Thorat and Newman shows how important these processes are. So where does all of this leave us? What's the value of recognizing and highlighting the play of hierarchies of effect? The key point here is to illustrate the relational and interactional nature of caste. To the extent that caste is performed, of course, it can be contested and challenged. As Professor Bonilla-Silva has argued in the context of race, and apologies if I'm stealing your thunder, subjectivity can be deracialized through a concerted, effective political strategy to foster mutuality. And I want to close by turning to my own work, charting the outcomes of social mobilization for equality. The first thing that Dalit movements in South India have done is to create what Crosby calls habit-busting habits. One of the markers of caste in everyday interaction is postures, attitudes, and overt embodied expressions of deference. Early movements talked tough and spoke of hitting back in a Fanon-esque project to reshape the subjectivities of participants and rework the dominant structures of feeling. Rise up, hit back, was one of the defining slogans of the Dalit hunters in South India, as they sought to infuse people with the courage to stand up to and fight back against caste. Secondly, such movements alter the taken for granted scripts. They offer alternatives and challenge the accepted wisdom, both physically by, for example, smashing up stalls that serve people with separate glasses, but also ideationally by envisaging a caste-free future and by challenging, as in, I don't know if any of you've seen, in the past month, there's been a big debate in Tamil Nadu because members of the Liberation Panther Party suggested that their leader could one day be deputy chief minister, let alone chief minister, and immediately they were told, don't be ridiculous. So challenging the notion that a Dalit can be in a position of power. In the process, participants have been emboldened to aim higher, afforded a clearer understanding of socio-political processes, and have developed counter networks of their own through which to challenge entrenched casteism and gain access to the resources they've hitherto been denied. The process is not smooth or easy, and frequently attracts a disproportionate backlash, as the imprisoned members of the Elgar Parishad could tell you all too well. But it reveals the affective and effective power of collective action. So I want to close by saying that Dalits cannot, as again Professor Guru noted, be expected or left to shoulder the burden of the struggle for equality alone. In highlighting the symbolic basis on which caste is legitimized, it is open for the rest of us to challenge that system. As the activist Tista Setalva put it in the wake of the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, which was animated by the beating of Dalit drums as they took the case against caste to that global forum, and I quote, "It is time every Indian whose cultural pride is pricked by international condemnation of the caste system initiate steps to rid themselves of the hidden poison of prejudice and hatred against certain sections of fellow citizens." Attuning ourselves to the affective logics of caste gives us the means by which to challenge it and impresses upon all of us the work that we can do towards that end. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
This is me today. I am a fish out of water because I'm not a caste scholar. So I was supposed to be a discussant, but I will mostly leave the presentation of my colleagues stand. I will just highlight that they both address the role of emotions and everyday experiences in the reproduction of caste systems. Caste, much like race, is about performance, about how we embody the systems of domination, making all of us subjects in the Foucauldian sense of the word. The similarities between, and I'm going to move this a little bit, race and caste systems are remarkable. For example, the humiliation Dalits experience is not different from what Blacks experience at the hands of whites. And the pleasure upper caste members feel when bossing Dalits is not different from that whites experience when disciplining Blacks. We were talking about that at lunch, yeah? Similarly, framing Dalits as dirty and dangerous is also the way Black and brown people are framed in racial systems. But as Professor Guru has pointed out in some of his work, this framing also creates a space for counter-hegemonic actions. I do cartoons, sorry. So here you see me, an old 62-year-old man scaring a younger white family, and this, me scaring them, only works because they believe the monster they have created, even though if they really knew, they could kick my behind quickly, and that's it, move on. As some of you know, a few years ago, I outlined a theory of the political economy of racialized emotions. Hence, I will use the rest of my time today to sketch some of my arguments to see if we can find similarities between race and class and caste domination. However, before I begin this outline, I have to explain why I, an old structuralist, analyst of race, got into emotions. When I announced the topic of the 2018 meeting of the American Sociology Association, people were astonished. Some even said, Eduardo is getting old, so he's getting soft. And I answered my critics in a confessional moment in the address where I said, I've been feeling race all my life. I felt race even before I knew what race was, and long before I recognized myself as a Black Puerto Rican, because as James Baldwin wrote in The Fire Next Time, quote, long before the Negro child perceives this difference, the socially imposed white superiority and Black inferiority, and even longer before he understands it, he has begun to react to it. He has begun to be controlled by it. Race has affected my life in and out of the academy, making me realize the terrible truth of Fanon's dictum about people of color being overdetermined from without. It's like me walking Cambridge campus. This is why I care about racialized emotions. Now onto my theorization. My first point should be obvious. All social categories, whether class, gender, caste, or race, cannot come to life without being infused with emotions. Hence, race caste actors feel the emotional weight of their location. As I already mentioned, I felt race's impact as a child, even though in my native Puerto Rico, the discursive space to think and talk about race is quite limited. And this is a good question for us to ponder. Can you feel a category that is not clearly articulated or expressed? And the answer for me is yes. Much like in the US, class is not dismissed as a central category of division. Yeah, they don't want to talk about class. Yet class is felt and experienced. Second, the emotional architecture of caste and race domination is intrinsically connected to the respective structures. However, much as you were pointing out, domination is not just a set of objective processes and practices through discrimination. The relations between actors in systems of domination generate an emotional subjectivity largely fitting of actors' location in the order. Dominants tend to exhibit ruling emotions, and subordinated actors fight, accommodate, and unfortunately can also internalize their position emotionally. So for us in the academy, for example, like those of us of color, and we need to be honest, I've been 31 years a professor, and guess what? I still have the nightmares. Did I kill my PhD? Oh my goodness. The other day I had this dream, yeah? And anxiety and feeling that we don't belong. Some of you smiling because you know we have that, yeah? We fight, but we internalize. This emotional subjectivity is key for maintaining as well as for contesting domination. Of course, agency and contradictions are always present. For example, not all white or upper caste members play part in domination, yeah? However, systems of domination remain in place because most actors tend to follow the path of this resistance. That's a worthy issue to investigate. Third, racialized caste emotions, which are real but not biologically determined. Something is real but not necessarily biologically determined, exist relationally. Our interactions across caste and race lines produce emotions for all of us. For instance, New York Times writer Brent Staples described his experience while walking in a neighborhood in Chicago as follows. I became an expert in the language of fear. Couple locked arms, reached for each other's hand when they saw me. Some crossed to the other side of the street. I've been a fool. I've been walking the street grinning good evening at people who were frightened to death of me. I did violence to them by just being. I tried to be innocuous, but I didn't know how. Out of nervousness, I began to whistle and discovered I was good at it. My whistle was pure and sweet, and also in tune. On the street at night, I whistled popular tunes from the Beatles and Vivaldi's Four Seasons. The tension drained from people's bodies when they heard me. A few even smiled as they passed me in the dark. So here you have racialized emotions in their full glory. White's fear of blacks is reminiscent of Fanon's comments in Black Skin, White Mask, that chapter. Look, a Negro, yeah? People of color and perhaps lower caste members become so afraid of not being perceived as monsters that many labor hard to make whites feel comfortable. I used to do that, particularly with white women, thinking if we're walking in a sidewalk and I walk, they're going to be afraid. And I thought it was a gender thing. And then I realized by doing what I was doing, I was reinforcing the stereotypical view of the black rapist, which is what they really cross the street. It's not because I'm a man, because I'm a black man, emphasis on the black side. And secondly, since white folks never do the courtesy of trying to make me feel comfortable, I said, hey, no need for me to be polite and nice. No more. Fourth, the racial caste subject emerges because people experience racialized caste relationships, not just practically, but emotionally. Individuals become branded, and once branded, and trust me, I wish I wasn't branded, I think I would have done better in life. But anyway, it is what it is. So once you are branded, they recognize that their status gives them material and ontological benefits. The whites get the benefits of being white, they're at the top of the system, norms are you, and those of us on the non-white side get the disadvantage of being the wretched of the earth, yeah? We experience the ontological terror of walking in the streets and not being recognized. Or going to a pub in Cambridge, I'd be like, watching all these documentaries on pubs, how they're going to welcome me. No, I'm just there, get my food, get my beer, and then I'm totally ignored. I become Ralph Ellison, invisible man. And that ontological terror, it's on my term, comes from Calvin Warren, professor of philosophy at Emory, extends to the academy, yeah? So not only contemporary, but historically, think about Hegel, saying that people of Africa have no history. And your own historian, Hugh Trevor Roper, who talk about Africa and pre-Columbian people in the Americas not having no history. And I quote him, that they have only darkness. And darkness is not the subject of history. How do you feel if someone says you're not? Yeah. By the way, he was an Oxford professor, but guess where he ended his career? At Cambridge, as master of Peterhouse. Fifth, racial and caste groups experience positive as well as negative emotions. Although perhaps for good reason we mostly focus on negative emotions, we need to also accept that we also experience positive emotions, such as joy. Whites, for example, experience pleasure in domination. Of course, we people of color, and I suggest also the untouchables, experience pleasure in resistance. An example of the latter is the extreme joy slaves experience in the illicit parties they organize. Of these parties, an ex-slave said the following: every dusky face was lighted up, and every eye sparkled with joy. However ill-fed they might have been, here for once there was plenty. Suffering and toil was forgotten, and they all seemed with one accord to give themselves up to the intoxication of pleasurable amusement. On pleasure in domination, suffice to see the faces. And I know these are horrible images, but that's part of the human experience. So you see here the faces of so many whites enjoying lynching parties. And I want you to look at the face of that little girl, little darling, yeah, being trained to be in the white supremacy game. Yeah, she's smiling. Yeah. And the postcard, if you can read what it says, it's a note to a person. It's a postcard. They were not hiding the fact that they were doing this inhuman event. Yeah. So saying that he attended the barbecue. So no one is fearful, sad, or anguished about what they are witnessing. How can humans enjoy such inhuman acts? Easy. Much like Israelis debase Palestinians by calling them human animals to facilitate their murderous campaign against them, lynching was about maintaining racial order, about putting blacks in their place. 6, as Sarah Ahmed has argued, racialized, and I add caste emotions, do things, and as such have physical or material effects. In the paper, I use Audre Lorde's example of sitting in a bus and having a white woman avoiding sitting by her. And initially, Lorde thinks that, oh, there must be something by me. Maybe it's a roach or something. However, she realized that the matter was worse than a roach. And I quote her. There was nothing crawling up the seat between us. It is me she doesn't want her coat to touch. As a child, she metabolized this encounter first as shame, shame of not being worthy of having someone sitting by you. And as an adult, she did right and metabolized it again into anger, which is a dangerous but important emotion. It's dangerous because it can consume us. Boy, it can consume me a lot, yeah? But it's also necessary for change. If you don't have anger, how can you fight and resist? By the way, the story about her in the bus should be common to most of us, because when we take the bus, we can do a game of how will that white person avoid sitting by me? Yeah, and they do the acrobatics of race. Okay, let me sit here. Or the logical place, you talk about reason, very good, well, reason and emotions go together. So they do the acrobatics and like, okay, the most rational choice is that seat, but 2 black people. Okay, I'll stand up. Yeah. So to be clear, the materiality of race caste emotions is not just based on encounters between individuals. These emotions are also imprinted in spaces, TV shows, or museums. Yeah. Think about the fact that 90% of the patrimony of Africa was stolen. How would you feel if you are from Africa or a person of African descent and you go to a museum and then you are like, oh, look at this stolen stuff, yeah? And there is an interesting documentary in Al Jazeera, Restitution, that is worthwhile. So it's playing right now. Examples of this imprinting occur when people of color watch the video of George Floyd being killed by Officer Derek Chauvin, or of Michael Brown's body being left on the streets of Ferguson for 4 hours. They, and I say we, because I also experience emotion, experience anxiety, anger, and sadness. And we experience that because the person being killed or being left for 4 hours on the street could be us. It could be my kid, could be my friend. And these emotions linger, they stay long with us. So sociology of health know that when you have a negative emotion affecting you, it has health impacts. Whites, unfortunately, even those who are liberal and progressive, do not process these things the same way. They can say things such as, oh my God, that is terrible, but quickly return to their normative white state of being, and may even ask us, sweetie, can you please pass me the popcorn? It's not the same intensity, and that's something worthy of discussion. What is the emotional balance and the depth of the emotion, even when you are relating to my pain? Seventh, race and caste emotions generate, and all of us have mentioned this, a hierarchical structure of feelings. All individuals in racialized or caste societies experience these emotions, but their emotions are not considered equally. The feelings of dominant actors become normalized, producing what political scientist Megan Boller classifies as a feeling power structure. The emotions expressed by those at the bottom of racial or caste regimes are always deemed suspect. If I had a dollar for every person who has told me, Eduardo, why do you complain? You are so successful. To which I reply, if I were white, I would probably be president of the US, which is better than Donald Trump. Yeah? A good example of white emotional supremacy occurred after I delivered a Zoom talk during the 2020 George Floyd moment at Duke before 4,000 people. This is the Zoom moment, yeah? Everybody's doing these big events. And because it was George Floyd, everybody went, mea culpa. We at Duke, we're going to change. I mentioned this in my presentation, the silencing effect a white woman crying has on discussions about race, and I showed this slide. I thought it was cute. Guess what happened? White folks were extremely angry. They even complained to my dean. They accused me of making light of these issues and objected to my use of the image of Barbie to represent white women. The reactions actually prove my point, and they might appear, or this incident might appear in the next edition of Racism Without Races. Lastly, because racialized emotions are social artifacts, they are always unstable and somewhat contingent. Take, for instance, the ambivalence of Erin, a nerd featured in the book White Like Me. Racism is the first hair on the back of your neck stands up. 20-year-old black man, not the 20-year-old white man. I thought, you do it, that's where the profiling comes from. I think we deal with that subconsciously every day. I recognize that sometimes I don't recognize it. I'm just appalled. Sometimes what the staff at the clinic will say, you are doing this for that? By the way, the that is important, yeah? I wouldn't give them the time of day. So I see myself as being more tuned in, and I was just sort of appalled to think that, you know, I really do have a certain amount of that going on. Erin's ambivalence allows her to realize how her peers react to Blacks, but also how she experiences the same emotions. Ambivalence opens a potential path for change, but without any guarantees. Dominants can remain ambivalent until they die. Hence, rebellion, social change, needs collective action. So let me end by stating that that I turn this off. That we're not condemned by history. Systems of domination have been fought and altered throughout history. The goal is to remove the categories of domination through a concerted, affective, and material strategy to foster a feeling of equality. And in the paper, I discuss specific steps to get there, but my time is up and I want to hear and learn from all of you. Gracias.